Hey guys, my guest tonight, Leslie Ghiglieri, has a story to tell about murder and a mother's devotion. See you in about 5 minutes. Grab your popcorn and snacks. Find a comfy spot, take a seat or lie down, and let me transport you to a place of fantasy, ghost stories, ancient legends, odd creatures, alien encounters, and other magical topics. You may even decide to join the conversation. From faraway lands to your own backyard, with a small dash of pixie dust. Turn out the light. Okay. Yeah, see that? It's already happening. I was waiting. How is everybody tonight? I hope you're doing good, and I hope you're somewhere nice and dry and not cold and all that good stuff. Um, just an FYI, it is really blasting outside right now. So I may lose power. Okay, I live in an old house. It has power issues in the storms. The thing is, I'm Charlotte, by the way, your host, because I just got into doing this. The thing is this house is old. It was built way back in the 50s, but it's well built. So, like, when I sit back here, I can't even hear the wind back here, or thunder or lightning or anything when I'm sitting back here. And that's how sealed off the studio is. It's when I go out there that I realize, that it's bad. Like today, I was in the living room. I was watching news a little while ago, and man, my cats were just active as all heck, horribly active. My dogs are kind of jumpy too. I finally, when I finally got up to come in here and do the show, my cats are standing at the window watching the wind because it was so strong at that point. And it's between now and midnight. It's supposed to get worse. Pacific time. It's supposed to hit 30 to 40 mile an hour winds. So we'll see what happens. So I've got it going tonight. If something goes wrong during the show, the power goes out. Everybody hang out. The guests, Leslie too. Everybody hang out on StreamYard because I'll do it on my phone, and I can do it on my phone because I have this handy dandy selfie light. So I can go to selfie light. So I'll try and get back on the phone for you guys so we can finish the show off. So I'm just prepared here, but you never know. I saw the lights blink a couple of times, but who knows? We might avoid it. Anyway, my name is Charlotte. I'm going to be your host for the evening. I have allergies real bad right now. I'm also the owner of the California Haunts Paranormal Investigation Team based out of Sacramento, California. We are 45 strong up and down the state, which means we'll help you. We can get to you. It may take us a while. California is a huge state. Okay, it may take us a while to get to you. But if it's a situation where we can't get to you right away, we also have mediums on staff who can help you. Call you, calm things down for you, discuss things with you, figure out what's going on. Okay, so we're always there to help. Now you can find us here. You can find us on Facebook at California Haunts. Just Googling California Haunts on Facebook. We're everywhere. We're everywhere. Under my name, right? You can find my name. YouTube is another place. We have a California Haunts radio page over on YouTube. You can find us over there. There's email available over there. You can find us on Twitter as Cal Haunts. You can find us at TikTok under California Haunts, all lowercase, and Instagram under Ghosty Gal, all lowercase. All right. So that's how you can find us. Now, that being said, if you like what you see tonight during the show and you haven't done so already and you're watching from Facebook, please feel free to follow because we have more than 250 videos over at YouTube and they're differing topics, not just paranormal. So I'm sure there's something there that would interest you. All right, so just follow. And like I said, when you go to YouTube, check out our YouTube site because you're going to want to maybe subscribe over there to the videos because we're doing one 6 days a week. Yeah, we're here. So check them all out. I'm a journalist. I don't like to cover the same stuff over and over. I get bored. So I have to vary it. So we have shows like tonight's. We talk about spouse abuse, everything. Talk about eating bugs, animal cruelty, you name it, we do it. So I like to vary it. Okay. That being said, our guest tonight is a returnee. We're going to do, we had a hard time last time because of the internet, and hopefully it holds out tonight. Plus, there's so much more of that story to tell. And I think it needs to be told. So Leslie Ghiglieri is with me again tonight. I hope I said it right. I've had one of those days. And I'm really excited to have her back. All right. So without further ado, dun, 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 here we go. Hello.
Hi, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Perfect.
Wow, I can hear you.
Does that mean it's too loud on your
No,
end?
that's a good thing.
Oh, good.
It's fine. If it keeps up with me, it's good. It's good. So before we get going, for the people that didn't hear you last time, tell everybody about you and who you are and what you do.
Well, I'm retired now, but I did have a career in law enforcement. It started out as dispatching for 911 center in Santa Cruz, California for 3 years, and then I moved to Oregon and I worked for the sheriff's office in Josephine County for 4 years, doing dispatch, warrants, records, and after that, I had a job working doing computer related work with 17 law enforcement agencies in Jackson and Josephine counties.
Hey, I did a story when I was working in the Woodland paper. I did do a story on the dispatchers. Is it as stressful as they say it is?
Yes and no. I liked it. I liked the thrill of it. I liked being in the middle of an activity that was going on, being able to help without the danger factor.
Mhm.
So it was kind of the best of both worlds for me. I enjoyed it very much. The thing I didn't like was shift work. But the work itself I enjoyed. Sometimes it could get stressful for sure.
I remember working night shift. I hated it. You go to work at 6 p.m. and get off at 4 or 5. Then you're wound up and you go to sleep. It's a wicked cycle.
It is. You never get adjusted, and we were always changing shifts. So you'd rotate from days to swing to graveyard, so you never really got accustomed to a particular time frame, and that
Mhm.
made it harder.
I can see that. I can see that. Okay, so you have written this book about this teenager that killed his father. And how long did that take to write?
It took me 5 years.
Wow.
And I would say the 5 years was, including just the getting of information together, the research, the talking with, the mother who was my primary source of information. So it was a lot of, conversations with her and sifting through that information and putting it in order, and then it was the writing.
What struck you as, I mean, a mother is going to love their child no matter what. So did it really did it hit you right here because she was so was she really, I mean, obviously if she's upset because it's her husband too. So what were her emotions like with all this?
Well, you have to understand that at the time we decided to write the book,
Hmm.
it had been a lot of time had passed. So it wasn't like I was doing it in the moment. But of
Hmm.
course, with situations like that that happen in your life, you remember them pretty clearly. So it was so many emotions, and writing about it, I definitely felt them. I'm sure not to the degree that she did,
Hmm.
but just, the problems she had with the son growing up and the difficulties that he was showing and trying to get help, and that sense of frustration, and then kind of giving up with trying to find help since she was unsuccessful, and so there's sort of this letdown, and then it keeps building up, and so she's worried, and so you have all these emotions that are feeding into when the crime does take place, and then the grief and the despair and just the loss of her husband. They were very much in love. It was the love of her life, like they say, and she was grief stricken, almost where she was confined to bed. She just was so sad. It was hard for her to function. So it
Well,
was just a lot of those emotions.
the other question I have is, he had there was a daughter too, right?
Yes.
Okay, so she wasn't at the house at the time this happened, right?
Right, she was out, at a sleepover at a friend's
Mhm.
house. She came home the morning after the crime took place, and she was 10.
It's kind of a good thing she wasn't there because who knows? Who knows what
That's
might have happened.
that's a question that both she and her mother have thought about ever since.
Now, his relationship with with the father, how did it get to? I mean, how do they surmise that it got to the point that it got to?
Well, that was one of the questions the mom had afterwards was, "Why would you do this?" It didn't seem like there was anything that justified the degree of violence that he went to in the moment. There were arguments. He was 16, he wanted to do things his own way, so
Mm,
there's a little bit of that behavior that kind of comes with the territory, but, that was exasperated with the drug use that he was doing, so um, it's hard to say if he just was targeting his dad because he saw him as standing between him and him doing what he wanted to
mm,
do.
mm.
It's very hard to say.
Every teenager goes through that though, even girls. I mean,
Mhm.
they hit a certain age and they're not old enough to be an adult, but they're not young enough to be a little kid. So they've got this thing going on where they want independence.
Mhm.
So I mean, his feelings that way are understandable because that's it's just normal stuff. But as you said, things were building up with him for a long time. What things were those? I mean, what did she notice was going on? When she was trying to get him counseling and stuff.
Well, for one thing that I point out in the book, and we talked about last time, was he exhibited some behavioral issues that weren't normal. And she had watched kids as a teenager. So she was used to children and their differences, but she was also used to kind of what was common in their behavior. And she felt fairly early on, she saw things that didn't seem right with him, and she never could put her finger on it, and as the years went by, they were more clear with specific incidences, but she could never really put that thread together. It wasn't until many years later that he was diagnosed as a sociopath.
Hmm,
So, obviously, that diagnosis would be part of the reason that at that time in his life, he chose a different path than most teenagers who are exhibiting a form of rebellion.
right, right, right. Now we talked a lot about what happened, and, and the police and everything, but we never really got to talk about the after effects on her and the daughter. So let's see if we can
Mhm.
talk about some of that. So let's kind of go back in time to at the time he was arrested and how his mother what his mother was going through.
Well, the first thing she wanted after or as I guess she was dealing with the grief was just what's often the people left behind want to know why. There's always that why. Why did you do something so senseless? So at first she was just um, driven by wanting to have an answer to that. It just didn't make sense. She said, "Your dad, did things with you. He always cared about you. Yes, they set parameters on him and he was disciplined when he didn't come home when he was supposed to and that kind of thing, but nothing to warrant violence."
Right.
And so she was dealing with the loss of and grief of losing her husband and at the same time trying to deal with the loss really of her son, but then the behavior on the other side of it, it was just so many different emotions and so she I guess with him she was tormented really for many years. Why did he do it? And I don't know that she ever really got an answer that satisfied her.
Now, did she visit him in jail?
Well, at first he was in the county jail, of course, until he went through the adjudication process and his sentencing and all that took place there. And she did see him at the juvenile detention facility that was over in an adjoining county. They didn't have a place to house um, felons really in Josephine County. They could house runaways or shoplifters, but they didn't have any place. So he had to be housed over in Jackson County. So
Hmm,
she saw him a number of times during the months that he was there, and she also saw him whenever he appeared in court.
interesting.
And y- yeah, again, she was always asking him. I understand now that anyone who goes to visit a juvenile, they're not allowed to ask them things about the crime.
Oh,
But at that time, she was able to, and she didn't get any satisfying answers, but she
Mhm.
would ask him, and then small talk.
Well, like you say, she didn't get any really good answers about the crime. Did he try to dance around it? You know, was he at the point where because he's a sociopath, obviously, so he's trying to charm everybody in sight, not thinking he's a bad kid. So is this what he tried to do to his mother afterwards?
Well, I think the thing that struck me was one of the first letters he wrote to her after being in county jail was that he thought he could be taken out of jail and be allowed to stay at home on some sort of house arrest,
Hmm.
which indicated to me he had no real conception of the finality of what he had done and how serious it was.
Mhm.
In different statements, he said things like he'd been planning it for years. He'd been lifting weights in order to be able to take on his dad. But then in other statements, he said it was a spur of the moment and he only thought about it right before he did it. So
Wow.
he was never really clear, even after the fact, of how much he had planned it and how much had been just at the spur of the moment.
Hmm.
But that was it. He just treated it as though, well, now this is where we are, so we need to move forward from here as a family. He didn't seem to show any sort of indication of the seriousness of his circumstances,
Mhm.
which is kind of odd. You think, I mean, a
Right.
gun and murder, you'd think he would have felt something, but he didn't indicate that either in when he spoke to her or in his letters.
Makes sense though, because you hear a lot of that about certain murders and how they are. They're just totally detached from what they did. They just don't get it. It
Hmm.
just doesn't register.
Hmm.
Now, the daughter being 10 years old, how did she take all this at the time?
Um, the thing that struck me when I was going through the paperwork is she had to repeat her story of finding her dad's body over and over to different people.
Mhm.
And the detectives, even in their reports, said how just straightforward she was and how calm she was. And they wouldn't have expected that from a person her age. Um, sh- she she ended up having to kind of fill in for her mom at some points because the mom was struggling so much with her grief that sometimes she wasn't what she maybe should have been for her daughter, and the daughter ended up being the one to do the comforting. I think that was very hard for her.
Mhm. Mhm. Especially at that young age. And then, as you were talking about the mother having to go through this grief, did she end up going to counseling and all this after this happened?
The only counseling that I know that she had was they were members of a small church in Grants Pass, and they were very close to the people in the church. So there was a tremendous amount of support from the church community. And the pastor there had her come in and see him whenever she wanted, but definitely once a week. And he would give her a place to vent and talk to her and pray with her and encourage her. And when Dwayne started writing letters to her, and there were a lot of very nasty, very um, disturbing letters, she would share them with him, and he would try to just be there as support for her. So that's the counseling she got. She got uh, the counseling from her church community.
Mhm.
And
So,
with
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry, go
No,
ahead. Oh,
I,
I was just going to say with Dawnette, Cherie encouraged her to get counseling and told her, she'd help her find someone. But Donette just reassured her mom and told her, "I have friends at school and people that I feel comfortable talking to, and they'll listen to me." And at that point, Cherie didn't want to force her, so that's kind of where they left it.
Well, I can only imagine her emotions and how she was torn because on one hand, her beloved husband, was dead. On the other hand, her son did this, and it must have been so hard for her. Did she ever like I know she was getting the letters. Did she ever go to prison once he was convicted?
Well, the murder happened in 1986 in
Hmm.
the fall, and he was sentenced in May of the following year, so 1987. And there's a prison up north, northern part of Oregon in Salem, where he ended up. And he was up there for about a year before she kind of got talked into going up there with a friend. She didn't really want to go, but she just decided to anyway.
Right.
And it was a very bad experience. So after that experience up there, she said it really set her back. And I took that to mean all the feelings that she was starting to maybe um, move forward
Mhm.
from. She was just back in the grief and how did he do this and why did he do it, and it was very hard for her, so she didn't see him again for 12 years.
Wow. 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 In the meantime, he's sending her letters.
Yes.
I can only, like I said, I can only imagine her thoughts, especially with the letters. I mean, there had to be some good stuff in there, where he was charming her in some letters, and then the real scary stuff.
Yeah, you're absolutely right because as I mentioned in the book, there were over 350 letters
Wow.
over the course of that time period, and they went through every gamut of emotion that you can imagine. And there was at the beginning, most of them were awful. Most of them were the reason we're in this situation is because of what you did. Meaning, he would say that to her. It's how you raised me. It's your morals are terrible. You shouldn't have brought me up that way. Dad was terrible. I mean, he was using a lot of profanity and blaming her and blaming her husband. So that's what she faced. That was pretty consistent for a long time. And
Mhm.
so the letters, she said, would just pile up on her counter and in the kitchen, and she wouldn't open them.
Hmm.
She would finally open them, but it certainly isn't something she wanted to do. But she did feel it was important to stay connected to him. It was hard for her to wrestle with all those conflicting feelings
Mhm.
because opening those letters then opened her up to a lot of emotions.
Mhm.
Um, and it would have been somewhat easy, I guess, for her to just say, I'm not doing this anymore. It's just too hard on me. But she stayed with it. And as time went on, there was change. But like you said, um, then there were letters that said things differently,
Mhm.
uh, not and kind of seeming like he was taking responsibility, but
Mhm.
then she started to question, was that sincere or not?
Mhm.
So it was hard to then take even good things that he said and believe that there was sincerity behind it.
Makes sense. Makes sense. Um, the other thing I was wondering with all this, with these letters, was he under any kind of psychiatric care when he was in jail?
Oh, yes. Yeah, once he was diagnosed, definitely that played into it. I don't know how much care he had in terms of other than evaluation while he was in the county jail, but when he was up in prison, that was part of his assessment, regular assessment, and things were required of him because of that.
Well, I just wonder because of the letters, if because the prison will look at stuff, even from the inmates going out. I'm just wondering if anything out of those letters reached back to the psychiatrist that was talking to him at prison.
I don't know. I kind of wondered about that myself since I read the letters. A lot of it was ramblings, a lot of it was talking about how he was in the hole again. He was always causing trouble, and he seemed to be at least in the beginning, kind of proud of that. He was just like, "Oh, I was in the hole again," and, or blaming the guards. These guys here, they just look for reasons and all that. Not his fault, or somebody else got him in trouble.
Mhm.
Um, so, yeah, I think that's one of the really interesting aspects of the book. I
Mhm.
had a retired psychiatrist, read the book and give me a review, and he called it thought provoking.
Mhm.
And I deliberately made it clear to people reading the book that I was not taking a side for whether he was sincere here and not sincere there, that I was giving them excerpts of letters and providing feedback about things that Cherie would tell me
Mhm.
about her contact with him, and um, let them decide whether or not he was being sincere, if he was truly changing.
Mhm. So now the next question I have is, why did it take her? What made her decide to go see him after 12 years?
She got a phone call from a chaplain up at the prison, and he told her, "The prison isn't going to call you, but I wanted to let you know that your son has been taken to a hospital here in Salem and he's in a coma." So she didn't waste any time and made arrangements to go up to Salem. A friend of hers took her up there.
Mhm.
And when she got there, he was still in a coma, but she stayed there for 5 days until he came out of the coma. So um, she definitely, that was an interesting part of the book to me, about how they both must have felt after that much time had passed and not seeing each other. I don't have any records of phone conversations they had, but I know there was references to phone conversations. So
Mhm.
even though I had the information from the letters, I don't know what may have transpired over those 12 years as far as her conversations with him.
Mhm. Mhm.
But that's when she saw him, was after 12 years.
And then why was he in a coma? What happened to him?
They never knew exactly. There was a suspicion he took medication. By this time, he had been diagnosed with a genetic disease that they didn't know that he had at the
Mhm.
time they adopted him. And so he'd been diagnosed with that. So he was on medication for that. And it's unknown to me whether or not he was taking any sort of Prozac or medication for his mental condition, or what they perceived as his mental condition, even though he was diagnosed as a sociopath. I don't know if they were giving him medication,
Mhm.
anxiety medicine, or anything. Uh, so he was taking medicine. Um, I'm sorry, what was your question? I got down a rabbit trail there.
Because I was just wondering if they knew what had caused him to go into the coma.
So there was a question whether or not somehow the medications had been mixed up. That was the story that she heard, and that's the story Dwayne had told her. So whether or not that was true, or if somebody was passing around something else that he had taken, which substance abuse was definitely a problem for him, and in prison. So it's hard to say exactly, but it was something he took, whether by accident or on purpose, that put him in a coma.
So did he awaken while she was there at all?
He did. He did. And he was pretty weakened by having been in the coma.
Mhm.
And so I think their conversation was, it was a little hard for him to be real communicative,
Mhm.
but I hoped that I painted a picture in that part of the story as to how emotional that seeing each other was for them both.
Mhm.
Because 12 years, she had seen some indications of a change. He was not as hostile as he had been. He was talking to her about going to church, and I know there's a lot of a lot of people go to prison and suddenly become church going
Yep.
people and conversions, and whether or not that's sincere, it's
Mhm,
questionable. But she, of course, as the mom, she did want to believe the best.
mhm,
Um, but I think she was also very guarded just because she didn't know her son. I mean, the violent act that he did was nothing she anticipated, and she was afraid of him, continued to be afraid of him. So I think those things made her want to believe that there was some change. So anyway, in that moment, just seeing each other after 12 years, I think was very emotional. They had a good conversation. He was a little bit, "Why haven't you come and seen me for 12 years?" And then she was a little bit defensive, telling him, "I couldn't see you unless I felt like you were changing."
mhm,
And I think she was going to stick with him no matter what. But I think as she saw some real change in him by his behavior, not just what he said, then she was able to care a little bit more for him and be more willing to entertain the idea of seeing him
mhm,
again.
mhm. So did she ever go back to see him?
She did. It was a little bit over time. Part of it was just a logistics problem because later in his incarceration, he ended up in Umatilla, which is a really long drive
Mhm,
from where she lived in Murphy. So it meant overnight stays. It's and somebody else going with her. It was kind of a difficult thing to arrange.
mhm,
Um, and at first, she didn't want to arrange it because why should she go to see him? It just made her feel awful, like, "Here he is, and this is my son, he's in prison." It's
mhm,
just very hard to be faced with that and be in that environment, and then thinking about what could have been and all the things that must have flooded her mind.
mhm,
So, but over the years, she did start to see him more and develop a different relationship with him, and as the years went by, the tone in the letters did change. It wasn't consistently changing. It
mhm.
was back and forth, but it was moving toward more change. And it was interesting reading.
Mhm, mhm. I can imagine. But I can imagine her too, that that 12-year drop. I mean, if it were me and I knew how my son had killed my husband, I mean, all
Yeah.
you see in your mind's eye is either your husband or you're gonna see the son carrying the gun.
Yeah. Yeah,
So
I'm sure it tormented her always. She told me she it's interesting because when we talked about forgiveness, she felt her Christian faith, I don't know if you'd say required, but maybe required her to be able to do that, but a person can only do what they're able to do. She
mhm,
knew that for her and most people, from what I understand, if you hold on to unforgiveness, it becomes bitterness, and the person that is holding on to the unforgiveness is worse off for it. Excuse me. So, for your sake, but it's very hard thing to do. So she grappled with it. It was definitely she wanted to, and sometimes felt like she had let go of the anger, but then it was only as she saw change in him that
mhm,
then she could feel and saw him seeming like he was accepting responsibility, that she could forgive him.
mhm,
But it
mhm.
it took years, Charlotte, years.
I can imagine. And what about the daughter all that time too? What were her feelings with all this?
The daughter went and saw Dwayne when he was in the county jail, and she had the exact same question that Cherie did. Why did you do this? Why
Mhm.
did you do this to our family? And he basically, at that point, shrugged, basically just hemmed and hawed and didn't really answer her. And she walked out of there telling her mom, what you do is up to you as far as seeing Dwayne, but I don't ever want to see him again.
Mhm.
And what happened after that was she was forced to see him because she had to be a witness in the court hearing. So she had to testify about finding her dad. And that was very difficult on her at 10 years old. She was 11 by then. Her birthday shortly after the day of the murder.
Mm.
So it was very hard on her. Um, she never saw him after that time in the courtroom. He wrote to her. He told her she probably didn't want to hear from him, but he felt he needed to reach out to her anyway. He tried to reconcile with her, told her he would understand if she didn't ever want to see him or talk to him, but he had to make an attempt from his point of view.
Mhm.
I have several letters he wrote to her. She wrote two to him and pretty much told him what she thought of what he did
Mhm.
and that she didn't think he was admitting his responsibility to what he had done to their family. So I think she says she's forgiven him,
Mhm.
and sometimes you've forgiven as best as you can. You know, the hurt is kind of
Mhm.
lingers because you have loss. You know, so I it was very hard on her because then she had to be the mother and not only not have her dad to walk her down the
Mhm.
aisle, but then she had to kind of help her mom kind of get through it. So it's a lot for a 10-year-old girl.
Now, did they move out of that house? Well, you'd think they would.
No, they never moved out of the house.
Oh, wow. That's something
It
too.
it's very interesting. After the murder happened and family had come to stay with them for a short time to give them support, after the family left, Cherie talked with Dawnette and asked her, what do you feel about being in the house? And Dawnette's reply was, this is our home. I want to live here. So she didn't have to think about it. Now, as far as Cherie goes, they bought this bare piece of property that was scrub and poison oak and rocks and turned it into what became a wedding venue along the river. Beautiful, beautiful place. And
Nice.
it's
Nice.
almost magical, really. It's just serene and the birds and the river. It's really beautiful. So there was a lot invested from both Cherie and Don over the years that they were fixing the property up and turning it into something that it wasn't. But Cherie was very willing to have sold it and moved elsewhere if Donette expressed even the slightest, I don't want to be here after what happened. But Donette didn't. So they continue to own the property there.
And is Wayne still in jail?
Dwayne passed away.
Dwayne. I'm sorry, Dwayne. My mind was thinking Dwayne.
That's
He
all
passed
right.
away.
Yeah. Yeah. He was 40. He passed away of the genetic disease that he had. It was Alport syndrome.
Mhm.
It's a liver disease, so a kidney disease, excuse me. And yeah, he had declining health for a number of years that affected his vision, his hearing, his mobility, um, many surgeries. He had a lot of health issues for a lot of years, which I guess you would say, humbled him in a number of ways.
Mhm. Mhm. And I know, like I said, we're going to talk about the aftermath of all this with the family. So when he passed away, how did the mother feel? I mean, was she really sad about it? Was it more like a relief, or
She was, and I have written about that in the book
I
a
love your
little
book.
more detail. But she was really sad because by the time that he passed away, there was a lot of consistent change. She was seeing him regularly, and by regularly, I mean like every 6 months.
Mhm.
And their letter writing was very regular. He was doing things to help other people in the prison that she would hear about from outside sources when she went up there. He was uh, just thinking about others more than himself. And his conversation was about her and how she was, and just a different sort of person. So it was really hard for her when he passed away because she said she felt like that was the Dwayne that she, wanted to get to know, and then to have him pass away was hard for her.
Mhm. Mhm. I mean, yeah, I can understand that. I can understand that. Um, let's talk about this wedding venue. I think I've seen photos of it online. It's beautiful, absolutely beautiful.
Oh, yeah, it is
Yeah.
beautiful. So what did you wanna know?
Well, just how long did it take them to get it to that point? Because I mean, it had to have been really hard, at first after after that happened. But then to turn it around, how long did it take them to get to where it's at now?
Well, you mean after the murder
Yeah.
happened?
Yeah.
A lot of the major stuff, I guess you'd say, happened. The transformation happened while Don was still alive, because Don, by profession, had been a heavy equipment operator, and he
Mhm.
had a grader there. So he spent a lot of time just moving the earth around and sculpting everything because it was just this bare land.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the transition happened when he was there to unearth the trees that were along the river bank, and that place is full of rocks. So all of that was took heavy equipment. That's nothing Cherie could have done by herself. But as far as Cherie was loved plants and flowers and anything that bloomed. And so she set about um, removing rocks with a pick and a shovel and a wheelbarrow, and planting beautiful bushes, rhododendrons, azaleas, just beautiful plants on the property. And that was, she used that for therapy. That was one of the things that when she was feeling really sad and couldn't get her mind off Dawn, she would go out and just work from morning till dusk, just moving rocks and turning it into even a more beautiful place. So um, that's what she did, and
Mhm.
it provided a lot for her to be able to transform it. She told me that at a certain point, she felt that she had reached what she and Don had wanted in the property, and she took a glass and toasted the sky and said, "Don, we did it," and I thought
Mhm.
that was really sweet, because she always had that vision, and what they didn't complete together, she was able to do on her own.
That's awesome.
And when they had the wedding venue, she and Donette went into business together. So Donette was part of just creating that environment where people wanted to pay to come get married there.
Mhm. Is it still a question in the chat room? Is it still a venue?
No, it's not. Even though it was a beautiful place and a number of people got married there, it is not a profitable venture to run a wedding venue. It just isn't by the time you have tables and setup and just all the things that was required to keep the place up so that it looked perfect.
Mhm.
They did it for a number of years. I'm not sure exactly how many years they ran it, but they had a lot of couples have wedding pictures there.
Hmm. Now, how did you meet her?
I met her because we attended the same church in Grants
Mhm.
Pass. I hadn't met her one on one. It was a small church, but for some reason, I hadn't ever met her. And it was the February before the murder happened in October
Mhm.
when my husband and I, well, actually, we weren't married yet. We were engaged, but we went to a Valentine's Day sweetheart banquet that the church put on at a restaurant. And we were seated with Don and Cherie. And so we spent the evening getting to know them and having dinner with them. And it was wonderful. They were both very friendly, very engaging, just nice to be with. So that's how we originally met. And that was in 1986.
Interesting, interesting. So when after the murder did she come to you to write this? That's fantastic to have somebody do that. I mean, that's respect.
That wasn't we didn't have that conversation until 2016.
Mhm.
And I was she occasionally would have women meet at her home for like a barbecue or a luncheon of some sort. We'd always eat outside because it was so beautiful.
Mhm.
And so it was at one of these events that I was sitting with a mutual friend and we were talking. And this friend, her name's Sharon, we were talking about how beautiful Cherie's place is and just what we thought of Cherie and just how much we admired her. And Sharon mentioned something about, oh, her story should be a book. And anyway, that led to me staying after the event. And I was talking to Cherie in her kitchen, and we just ended up talking about it. And she said how she always wanted it to be a book, not just because it was tragic and she didn't want to bring attention just to the crime, but more about the afterwards, more about what she had learned through the time of dealing with Dwayne and knowing that now drug abuse and addiction is even worse than it was then, and with the availability of drugs. And so parents, struggle with dealing with their kids. And she just felt that parents that were struggling could be encouraged. In a way, it doesn't sound like that makes sense because how could they be encouraged by this terrible story? But she put the spin on it that she had gone through what could be almost the worst scenario, and that it turned out all right. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
she just she wanted to encourage parents not to give up on their kids no matter what, to always pray for them, um, just not to lose hope. I guess is what she wanted parents to feel, and that if she had gone through something this traumatic, they could go through whatever they're going through.
Mhm.
And I think another good message is that um, since she had so much trouble finding help at the early stages when he was in the early teen years and he was having substance abuse problems, and we see that more and more, and there's so much addiction and not that many places for treatment. I think that the churches need to be aware that there are families in their churches that are dealing with addictive issues and either learn how to cope with that. Just recognize that there are those things that go on in families that maybe are left unsaid. Maybe you don't want to tell the person you're sitting next to in church that your kid's coming home stoned or whatever. I just think giving them support in some way. I don't have any solutions for it, and we are
Right.
giving a portion of the book sales to an addiction recovery program here locally in Southern Oregon. So we felt like that was really an important um, thing to do, was to support a program that provides help that Cherie couldn't find. But
Mhm.
there's just not enough of it. And so Cherie really wanted her story told. And so I said, well, I'd be glad to do it for her. I do my best. I like to write, and so just between the two of us, we decided, okay, we would do it. And I knew that meant, spending a lot of time with her because she's the source of information. And it ended up being a 5-year effort from start to finish.
Let me ask you this, and this is coming from my perspective as a crime reporter. I remember covering murders. I remember covering stuff that involved younger teenagers and stuff.
Mm.
That stuff can get really, because you're interviewing the parents, you're interviewing the people involved that lost the person or whatever. That's got to be trying on you, to take in all that emotion because that emotion rubs off on you.
Um, you're right. It did a lot. And reading the letters, um, and thinking of, she read the letters and how, as a parent, you would feel when you'd read those. Um, I'll tell you a little story. I was working on writing, and I took a break. I went out to the mailbox and got the mail out of the box and came in. I was kind of thumbing through it, and there was this advertisement. I think it was for insurance, and it was a picture of this couple, this family, and they had this little baby. And I was looking at that picture and I just started crying. And I was thinking about Don and Cherie so much wanting a child and not being able to have children on their own, and adopting this little boy and being so excited. And I was thinking about, as you're a parent and you look at your children and you have your hopes and dreams, and I'm getting all choked up thinking about it. I was thinking, this is Don and Cherie and Dwayne. This is them looking at their infant, and just imagining, oh, when he gets older, we'll do this and that. And then here, this is the way the story played out for them. And it just made me super sad. So um, there were times that I read portions of the letters or was writing something, and I was very sad. And of course, I love Cherie. So writing about somebody that you love, knowing that they went through this, is really difficult. You're right. It was very difficult, but I had promised, so of course I wasn't not going to finish.
Hmm. Well, I remember covering not a murder case, but a car accident case that turned into a
Mm,
murder two thing, you know. And I remember it had to do with a teenager. Oh, excuse me. And I remember being out on a break at the courthouse, and I saw this woman just anguish on her face, absolute anguish. So I snap a photo because you're a news reporter. That's what we do. Took it
mhm,
back to the newsroom, and even my hardcore editor went, "I'm not running this.
mhm,
This is just too much emotion for this woman." I think it was the girl's aunt, and she realized while she was at trial that the girl was going to be going to juvie, for what she did, and
mhm,
just the anguish
mhm,
even from that end. So it works both ways. But like I said, I can imagine what you went through writing this, because I used to have those emotions too. When I was just
mhm.
when I spent 2 weeks with people in trial, and that was it, and off I went. But you still get that emotion.
Yeah. Yeah, seeing people dealing with the hardest things of their
Mhm,
life, it's hard. Life is hard.
mhm.
And yeah, and some people with the book have expressed that. Like this story, I think you might have even said it. This is a really sad story. It's
Yes.
just sad, and it is. There's no question. But my hope was not to leave people there, you
Mhm,
know, um, with this is really sad. And even if they cry, that she was inspiring. And I may have told you I've had people send me emails and say, I just got done reading your book and I just related so much to this, not in the exact same way, but I was able to take the situation that we're dealing with in our family and be inspired by what Cherie did. And it gave me hope to stay the course, to keep on. And not that, and Cherie was very careful not to be manipulated.
mhm.
Some people may read the book, and because there are excerpts of letters in there, think that he was manipulative. He may have been, he may not have been, maybe sometimes he was, maybe he never was. That's kind of up to
Career.
a reader
Yeah.
to determine. But
Well, like I said, I can imagine. I can imagine. I mean, it's your child, and it's a it's an ugly situation to be put into because he has killed your husband, but you still love your child. You still love your husband. So
mhm.
it's gonna rip you up inside.
Yeah, and I think she struggled too with Donette in the middle of that because I think it was hard for her, even though Donette said, you need to do as a mom uh, what is important for you with your child. I mean, as she had that kind of conversation as Donette got older and um, could think more like a mother, but it still has to have been hard for Cherie to not feel like Donette was upset for her continuing to see Dwayne, because when she did go to see him, then she was leaving Donette. I mean, she got older because, like I said, it'd been 12 years, so she was older by the time Cherie started actually making trips to go see him for overnight or anything. But
Mhm,
Donette did tell me that she told her mom, I don't want to hear about the trip.
mhm,
So you can be happy with how it went. You can want to talk to somebody, but I think she really tried to encourage her mom just to talk to her friends.
mhm,
It just remained very hard, which is understandable.
mhm. Absolutely. So what are they up to now?
Um, so Donette lives on the property with her husband,
Mhm,
and she works, and and Dwayne passed away, like I
mhm.
said, at 40, and Cherie passed away in 2019. I think it was about 9 years after Dwayne had passed away.
What a sad, sad story. Sad, very sad. But at least she got to build the property up, you know, beautiful to what her husband had wanted as well. So at least that happened.
Yeah, they did amazing things with the property. I don't think I mentioned this, but when they moved up from California, they had a dream of having 10 acres.
Mhm,
And when they came up here and they saw the real estate agent, the real estate agent said, there's a 2-acre parcel, and it's really, I think it's got a lot of potential. I want to take you out there. And they fell in love with the Applegate Valley because it is very beautiful. And they walked around and they bought it, and they thought they bought 2 acres of property, but as they were working the property, Don kept shaking his head and saying, "Cherie, seems like a lot more than 2 acres." And it was resurveyed, and if I remember correctly, it's more like 6 or 7, which
Wow.
is kind of interesting that they thought it was 2. But they didn't pay property taxes on all that
That's
land until
awesome.
it was resurveyed. So they kind of lucked out in that way.
Yeah.
But they they were able to enjoy their dream for a while. They wanted to move to the Pacific Northwest. They wanted to live where they could hunt and fish, especially fishing. They both loved that. They wanted to be in the trees and mountains, and they did that. They got a beautiful piece of property and worked the heck out of it, and turned it into an amazing place. And they had some very happy years. They ended up having a child after they'd adopted Dwayne, and they never thought they would have one.
Mhm.
And Cherie never remarried. Um, Nobody could be what Don was to her. Um, she had some men friends over the years, but never anyone she wanted to marry. And she, she has a wonderful relationship with her daughter, did have, and
Mhm.
so I think she was a wonderful friend to many people, and so she lived a good life. She was older when she passed away. I mean, she was, gosh, I think she was a bit close to 80.
Wow.
So yeah, so
So
she
she had
lived a
a
long
good long
time.
life. Yeah, real good long
I
life.
think she was about, I'd have to do the numbers, but I think she was about 45, 46 when Don was shot. So they've been married about 25 years.
Wow. Wow. You know what? Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for coming back for round two. It all held up for the most part.
Yes,
Held up
yes, wonderful.
I kind of dropped off a couple of times, but I'm good. The little black screen came up, but yeah. So I want to thank you so much. And you guys, if you haven't gotten this book yet, get the book. It's wonderfully written. It's detail oriented. It's a great book. It's a great book, and I thank you for
Thank you,
being patient
Charlotte.
and coming back on. And again, I bought the book. I had read it previously, and yeah. Well, I'm into that sort of thing anyway, but it's a great book, and you did very well
Well,
with
I appreciate reviews on Amazon. That's very
it. I can do
important
that.
for us authors to get good reviews on Amazon.
I
And
can do
go
that.
to my website. Are you going to put a link in there
I
for the
am.
website?
I'm gonna get the website
Great,
link up
thank
there and
you.
everything for you. And
Thank
but I
you.
really appreciate this. And what's next for you?
Well, actually, I'm considering. I've written 1 page, so that's not too much. There, it's not a big commitment, but I'm considering writing a second book,
Okay.
and it's I was the victim of stalking by a serial killer. And so I know it would make interesting reading. I'm not real sure I'm going to dive into it, but
Mhm.
it's definitely a story about a serial killer that's never been told.
Anybody we know?
Yes, his last name was Kemper,
Oh my
Edmund Kemper.
gosh!
Yes, he lived
Really?
across the yeah, he lived across the street from me.
Oh my
So
god!
I have a story.
Boy, you have an interview here when you get done. Yeah, we want you back on that one. Wow, Kemper.
Yes. Between the murder, he my contact with him was between the time he murdered his grandparents and was in a Atascadero until he was 21, and he was cured, you see. They let him out
Mhm.
when he was cured,
Of
and the
course.
time he started his co-ed killing.
Wow.
Uh, so I was in between there.
So
Yeah.
grandma in the trunk and all that good stuff.
Oh yeah, he was pretty awful.
Oh,
Yeah.
we'll definitely have to chat on that one. I'll tell you. I'll tell
All
you.
right,
Well,
I'll give you a
you,
call when
well,
it's done.
you know who had I can't remember. I was someone this Edward Kemper thing. You said one of the there's a serial killer that was living about 4 blocks from me with his grandmother.
Really?
Yeah, and I can't remember who the hell. Richard Trenton Chase.
Oh, I'll
He
have
lived
to
like
look
four.
him
He had
up.
an apartment over like about 4 miles from me, and then his mother, her grandmother, lived about 3 or 4 blocks from me. And I remember when
Mhm.
they picked him up, my dad, you know, was a secure was a marshal at one time, and he just got a kick out of going following ambulances and all that. That's where I got it from. That's why I did it for a living. And so he, of course, he piles me in the car and drives me over. And says, "That's where that guy lived. That's where that murderer lived." So yeah. So Chase was like 4 blocks from me. I can't. Oh,
Wow.
fantastic! I'm not saying fantastic because it's a murderer, guys. I'm saying, I mean, the guy's story is incredible because like you say, they did let him out because he was cured.
Yes. Well, and you know what, Charlotte? That's not so different from today either.
Hmm.
People are let out knowingly after they've committed heinous crimes.
Yes.
So,
Yes.
only to do it again.
Only to do it again. Yeah. Absolutely.
Mhm.
All right. Well, on that note, thank you for coming. Goodbye. No, thank you for coming. I really appreciate it. Can't wait to get you on again. Let me know when you're good on the camper book because I'll be right here. I'm not going anywhere.
Well, I'm hoping I'm not taking 5 years on this one. I don't have to rely on anybody else's, although I do have to do research
Right.
on those Atascadero days.
Right. Right. Yeah, he was a humdinger. That's for sure. See, when
Well,
I think
thank
of
you,
Oregon or
Charlotte.
Washington, I think of Bundy. That's the first thing I think of is all that area
Yes.
Bundy. But yeah, yeah, when you said Kemper, my eyes were like, bing. Yeah, that is really cool.
Yes, that
All
was
right.
the Santa Cruz days, you
Yes.
see.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it, and we'll talk some more later. Okay? It's all good.
Okay, sounds
All right.
good.
You
Thanks,
have a good one.
Charlotte.
Okay.
All
Bye
right, bye.
bye. All right. That was really good. Really sad, but really good. You got to get this book. This book is fantastic. I read it. In fact, I read it like twice. So I was leading her with questions through answers and all this. So that's my thing. Anyway, tomorrow 6:30 p.m. Nancy Matz is going to be here, and we're going to be talking about. And I'm going to try to read. Were you born just to watch life go by? I think that's the gist of what she's talking about tomorrow. So yeah, it should be an interesting conversation. Now, something else that's coming up. I have started a Patreon page, and I'll have more information on membership there. It's $5. $5 a Patreon. But what's going to happen is that Nancy and I are going to start this thing off, and after we have our usual talk on a Friday, we're going to go over there, and we're going to have question and answer period for you guys. But it's only for the Patreons. So we're going to start trying this out a little bit because I see like bringing in other guests to do this as well, where you can actually do a one-on-one that's not connected to the interview, with different guests and stuff. So it's going to be a new adventure for all of us, and you'll also get previews too. Like if I do a pre-record video with somebody, you get to see it 2-3 days ahead of everybody else. So I'm going to try to put together a package for this. So I'm just putting all this together. So I'll have more info for you later on, but I'm hoping to get this thing launched not this week but next week. Okay, so we'll see what we can do with that. In the meantime, see you guys tomorrow, 6:30 p.m. Pacific. If you like the show, share it with 5 people. If you hated the show, share it with 5 of your enemies. We're equal opportunity here. And yeah, and again, if you're watching from Facebook and you like what you saw, please hit that follow button and the like button and show me some love. And if you're watching from YouTube, same thing. Please subscribe if you haven't done so and hit that like button. But I'm going to leave you guys alone now, and I'll give you some of her information, like her website and where you can get her book and all that good stuff. And then I'm going to blow out of here because the wind is blowing and the lights are blinking, and that's never a good sign. So here we go. Let me get the info for you. Okay, her website is decisiontokill.com. And the book is The Decision to Kill. And of course, you can get that either at her website or on Amazon. Okay, guys. Well, like I said, I will see you tomorrow at 6:30 p.m. Pacific with Medium Nancy Matz. Have a great night.